The agenda this week got a powerful warning from veteran journalist Ted Koppel, reviewed the review of Ontario's electricity rates, and reflected on how to heal from the tragic history of Canada's residential schools. The agenda's Week in Review begins with finding refuge in Canada. You recently were over there, checking out the refugee claim process. What'd you learn that you didn't already know by going over?
Well, a few things. It certainly impressed me that we were doing the right thing to bring all these refugees over, because many were desperate to leave. Many were living in really bad conditions, and so that reinforced the view. Now, it's true not every one of them wants to leave. Some of them want to return to their country and are waiting, but many, many, many do. Also, we got to speak to the government officials, including the King of Jordan, who doesn't usually meet mere ministers, but we were honored to meet him. And Jordan is really pulling out all the stops to help us. We have a fantastic processing center, which they provided us. A lot of the people come on Royal Jordanian Airlines, no problem with exit permits. And Lebanon, similarly, I went the second time, and they're helping as well. But also to see all of our people there. We have 500 people on the ground working in these processing centers, and talk about real change. This is nothing that's ever been done before, to get 25,000 people over here in a matter of 3 months.
Okay, but in spite of all of that, you did not hit the targets that you set out during the campaign. You're disappointed about
correct. That? Moderately disappointed, but we always said we wanted to do it fast, but we always said more important is to do it right. So we had to be absolutely sure on the security checks and the health checks. And this machine overseas, it's like a wave. It starts slowly and then builds up. And once it's built up, we can deliver 3 flights a day, 4 flights a day, and they can bring in refugees in huge numbers. But in the early times, there are teething problems as people learn how to work together on something they've never done before. So I'm full of praise for all of our public servants. Huge work over there.
I wonder if you have any qualms at all about the fact that these refugees, quite understandably, are the focus of your attention right now. But I have heard, for example, from others who have said, you know, we're trying to get some Iraqi Christians out of Iraq who are just as persecuted as these folks, and they've been told to sit tight because the Syrians are now the priority. You feel bad about others who are having to wait longer because of this?
Well, I have asked questions about that, and I was assured by my department that none of the others are adversely affected. They're not.
Well, I'm hearing different.
Okay, I'm told that the resources diverted to help the Syrians were not diverted from other refugees. So the other refugees are probably going slower than we would like, but they're not going slower as a consequence of Syria. That's what I've been told. And I don't really apologize for putting the focus on Syria, because this is the worst refugee crisis the world has seen in decades. And Canada can't be a home to everybody, and there's nothing wrong with focusing on the worst crisis, letting the other needy cases proceed as well, but putting the main emphasis on the place where the refugee situation is very, very dire.
You did mention a moment ago that not everybody wants to come here. And in fact, I guess it was reported only 6.3% of refugees contacted said they wanted to come to Canada by February. Why do you think that number is so low?
Well, I think that number has since gone way up. I think there were issues about contacting people and whether people had their cell phones working to receive messages and things of that kind. So I think a large number. We're taking, there are way, way more that we could take that we are unable to take. But there are still some who don't want to come because they yearn to go back to their own country, and they're willing to wait, often in dire circumstances, with that hope that still burns in some. But many, many others have been there for a long time. They see the situation in Syria not getting any better, but if anything, getting worse. And so they're really excited and pleased and happy to come here. And you can see that, as I have, when you see the faces at the airports and in the media. And so I think there's a large number of very happy Syrians.
There's no question about that. No question about that. However, having said that, these are not the Syrians, for example, whom we also would have seen earlier on television hopping into boats and taking their lives in their hands to try to escape the appalling circumstances in which they lived. What would you say to those people who might argue that the ones that are chosen by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees are actually not the ones who need to get out of there the most?
Well, I would disagree with that, because the United Nations has its criterion of who is vulnerable, and everyone on that list is considered by the United Nations to be vulnerable. So we choose from that list, and we're after vulnerable people, irrespective of religion and other factors. And so some of them will be Christians, some of them will be Muslims, but they are all vulnerable according to the United Nations definition. And so
some more than others, though.
But the government-assisted refugees tend to be less educated, lower income, perhaps more needy, perhaps more vulnerable. Some of the privately sponsored refugees, they're still vulnerable, but perhaps less so. Perhaps they're better healed than many of the government. And the commitment we made is 25,000 government-assisted refugees, but there were also going to be at least 10,000 privately sponsored.
Ted, we remember well back in 2003 that about 10 million people here in the province of Ontario and 45 million Americans in the Northeast lost power because of that situation. Can you tell us the difference between what happened then and what you're writing about in your book?
Yes, what happened then was a natural event. Apparently some power lines were brushed by tree branches, and incredible as it seems, that caused a cascading outage, which, as you say, resulted in millions of people, not only in the United States, the northeastern U.S., but also in Canada, to be without power, as I recall, for about 3 days. I think 7 or 8 people died. It cost billions in lost revenue and expenses to both governments. And then the United States and Canada formed a joint commission to figure out what had happened. And interestingly enough, one of the things, and remember now, this was 13 years ago, one of the things that they concluded was that the power grid would be susceptible to a cyber attack. That was something that really no one had thought about back then, but they came to the conclusion that it could happen. And the difference between what happened in 2003 and the possibility of a cyber attack is that if someone is deliberately trying to take down the grid, they can keep on taking it down, so that the likelihood of this taking out tens of millions of people in terms of their electricity could last for as long as weeks or even months.
We can show the impact that you're talking about with a little graphic right now. Sheldon, if you wouldn't mind bringing this up. This is a map of the 4 major power grids in North America, which very clearly illustrates how Canada might be affected even if there were a cyber attack on the United States alone. And depending on whether the attack were to be aimed at the west or the east, different parts of Canada would also be affected. Can you give us a sense of who you think would perpetrate, what foreign power presumably, would perpetrate such a cyber attack?
Well, since you said which power would, it becomes a little more complex. Let me alter your question just ever so slightly by substituting the word could rather than would. The Russians could, the Chinese could, the Iranians possibly could, and the North Koreans seem to be on the verge of acquiring the kind of cyber capabilities that perhaps they could. Those who could necessarily, however, are not the most likely to do it. The interesting thing about the cyber capabilities is that those who are most capable are least likely, and those who are least capable at the moment are most likely. What I mean by that is if ISIS ever got its hands on the kind of cyber expertise to do this, they would be very likely to do it. They, mercifully, do not have that capability yet, but there are experts with whom I've spoken who believe that because they have a great deal of money, they can purchase the capability. They are the most likely to do it. Those who have the greatest capability because of interlocking interests with the United States, the nations like Russia and China, they are the least likely to do it, but they are already inside the grid. They definitely have the capability.
I note a few years ago that your former defense secretary in the United States, Leon Panetta, warned that the U.S. could be a victim of what he called a cyber Pearl Harbor. President Obama, in his State of the Union a few years ago, also pointed this out. Did those speeches, in your view, make much of an impression on your country?
No. I mean, simply put, the answer is no, and that's one of the reasons that I decided to write this book. I was intrigued, and President Obama, as you correctly note, mentioned it not once but actually twice in successive State of the Union addresses, but it was Leon Panetta's reference to a cyber Pearl Harbor. People of my generation, and Leon Panetta is of that generation, don't lightly use the term Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor sort of conjures up an image of absolute devastation. The likelihood that there could be a cyber Pearl Harbor in this country intrigued me enough that I looked into it to see whether this really was something that could happen. The quick answer is yes, it could. Will it? All I can tell you is that the commander of CENTCOM, General Lloyd Austin, told me it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when.
Well, let me use the nuclear parallel. Mutual assured destruction prevented, I guess in part, prevented a nuclear war for all of the years that the Soviet Union and the United States had that capability of destroying one another. Is there an equivalent MAD when it comes to the cyber world?
Not really, and I'll explain why. If, for example, the unthinkable had happened, and let's say, for the sake of argument, that Soviet missiles were launched against North America, against the United States, the president's military advisors would have known about it within seconds of those rockets, those missiles leaving their launch pads. In the event of a cyber attack, one of the great problems is it can take weeks, if not months, before the origin of that cyber attack is traced. If you can't say with a definitive decision that a cyber attack has been launched, let's say by the Chinese or by the Russians, the question is, against whom do you take action?
I think Ontario, as a whole, decided that they want to get rid of coal plants. So that politically, they voted in government multiple times on this platform, but the government was not very clear on what it was going to cost. In fact, they were very misleading because they said initially it was only going to go up, affect your bill about 1% a year. That's what the green energy was going to cost and all this. I think most people accepted that. They said, sure, I'll pay 1% more a year. But that's turned out to be, I mean, misleading is a very nice way of putting it. An outright lie might be more appropriate. That hasn't been the case. So I think a lot of Ontario residents now are saying, we've done our fair share. We've done more than almost anyone else in North America. We led the way. We took all the risk in implementing these policies first. At what point do we get a break? When are we going to put the brakes on these policies and rethink them a little bit?
I just want to be clear here, because I'm still of the generation that when you call somebody a liar, I think that's a big deal. So who lied about what?
Initially in the long-term energy plan, it said that your bills would increase by about 1% a year in relation to these policies. But it's turned out, maybe the line is strong. They may have meant to their best intentions that it would only be 1% a year, but it hasn't turned out that. And we've had many years of that not being the case.
Hasn't turned out that way, but would you say they knowingly, falsely promised that this would happen?
No, they might have just rushed into it and thought that this would work out, and it hasn't.
And it didn't work out. You want to add anything to that about whether or not the McGuinty government, quote unquote, lied about the advantages of phasing out coal?
I think they might have been optimistic in the same way that they promised they could get 25,000 refugees into Canada by 2 weeks ago.
Those were different Liberals.
Same idea, though. I mean,
yeah.
Politicians is what I meant to say. But I think I think that the important point is being made here that Ontario voters did vote to get rid of coal. That was an actionable campaign promise. They may not have realized what the price would be. That's part of politics. But I think the Auditor General is a bit oblivious to that Ontarians did want to get rid of coal-fired power plants. It was a popular decision.
Somebody brought up smart meters earlier, and let's do a little follow-up on that. Sandra, you got this clip ready? Should we do this now? Smart meters. Let's go. Roll it, please.
The meters have been installed and the technology is there, but we think that there's still things that need to be done to show that that investment was worth $2 billion. And I think that's something that down the road, people will be looking for. What we're recommending they do is on a go-forward basis, when there are major decisions to be made in the electricity industry in Ontario, that there should be solid cost-benefit analysis in place.
Brady, smart meters are supposed to make us use power more intelligently. Is it a strategy that's working?
I mean, conservation has been successful in the sense that Ontario is using a lot less power now than it was years ago. In fact, I think in 2015, the amount of power we used was at the same level it was in 1997. So something is happening where we're using less power. So that is, in that sense, has been successful. The Smart Meter program was problematic in the sense that it was sold on us that it only cost $1 billion. That was the initial estimate. It ended up costing $2 billion and counting. It's still not fully operational. And a lot of the data and various initiatives they thought they could pull out of the smart meter program didn't actually come to fruition, or haven't yet. They might sometime in the future.
Did they lie about it? No, never mind. I'm kidding. What do you, okay, smart meters, conservation. Are we getting the bang for the buck we were promised?
I certainly think that she's missed the boat entirely there as well.
The Auditor General?
Absolutely. We were in Paris during the climate negotiations where the rest of the world was commending and actually giving Ontario awards for its broader policies, including especially smart meters and the big data that comes from smart meters and the shift of time of use that we actually have implemented in our dishwashers, in our washing machines.
Let's just explain. Meaning if you use them after 7 p.m.
That's right.
or
Cheaper
before 7
times.
a.m., cheaper.
Yeah, and by and large, the Ontario public has responded quite well to that. So I think, number one, we're starting to see real people respond to the information that's being provided through our smart meters. Secondly, we're starting to see the benefits of the data. Nest, nice little home comfort thermostat that tailors to your usage. Your smart apps on your phone that allows you to tailor your energy usage. And the associated Powerwall and other energy storage devices that are really making sense when you have the data to understand how you're using.
Am I wrong about this? But every time I'm at Queen's Park and I talk to somebody about smart meters, everybody says that politically they're a turkey, that it's an issue that just hasn't worked well for the Liberal government. Do you agree?
I think it's easy for the opposition and for critics to make smart meters look and sound dumb, but I think that's short-selling them. Look, I think the Auditor General has some good points on them. I think everyone in the energy industry recognizes that there have been shortfalls, that there was a lot promised with smart meters, and we're not nearly there yet. But conceptually, the idea of using digital technology to measure usage and allow the suppliers to be wired into that in real time makes complete sense. It's the future, it's here. The implementation, the execution have clearly been expensive and inefficient in the sense that, and the auditor points out, that only a fraction of the data that is actually being used now. But it's going to take time, and to expect implementation and execution to flow flawlessly is frankly unrealistic given what we're dealing with.
Let me get you to follow up with this. There's no shortage of stories ever, in your paper and others, about how the energy file has gone to hell in a handcart, right? Just disasters happening everywhere, starting from gas plants, smart meters, on and on and on. If you were to point to some of the successes that this government has had over the past, what have they been in now? Almost 13 years in power. What would you look at?
Well, I guess let me start with one. Give me one bad, and I'll give you a couple good.
Okay.
So the one bad, in my view, is what I would call the stealth privatization of the energy sector. I'm starting with Bruce, but including the
Bruce Nuclear?
Yes, and also the gas-fired power plants, which were all taken away from OPG, our publicly owned utility, and given to private competitors and bidders, which we'll talk about later. And so we've lost a lot of control in terms of public policy. On the good side, I think we're in an energy surplus now, partly because our economy has tanked for a few years. But we're not risking the brownout. So there were billions of dollars invested in upgrading transmission lines. The auditor has pointed out there's still much more to be done with Hydro One's transmission. So we have nukes. I think renewables. We moved in an aggressive way, perhaps in a reckless way in terms of pricing. But you'll hear arguments on both sides on that. So we changed the supply mix. And we got rid of coal, which was a huge thing to do. Green energy was a job creation strategy that was very creative, very risky, and has had mixed results. But that was part of the mix as well.
I think the path of reconciliation includes everything. It includes everything. And without realizing it, I fell in love with a white lady, and never thinking we would ever marry. But I did. We married. And anything that a person asks, what now? reconciliation takes many paths. And sometimes you might get shocked of some of the things that are done in light of reconciliation. But that's what they are. You know, me sitting here is part of a major reconciliation. It's including now the education of Canadians of what really, really happened. And I really enjoy going into their classrooms. Still a little bit hesitant, still a little bit scared, but it's something now that at 72, 73, it's something that I must do. I have to tell people, as well as our own, that it's okay to reconcile to the fact of what happened to us.
This is your life's mission now.
Exactly.
Cheryl, I'm not sure it's possible to teach history in a completely generic, neutral, you know, like it's always written by somebody, right?
Yes.
It always comes from somewhere. They say history is written by the victors, right?
Yes.
Can you teach something as difficult and controversial as this in a truly quote unquote neutral fashion, or is it inevitable that this history gets politicized somehow?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't find, to be honest, that politics as such really come into it, because I think what we do is bring those kids in safely to this history and take them safely out. And we don't spend a lot of time too much on the politics. I mean, yes, the government policy, absolutely, we talk about that. But I think the students, what we all gravitate towards is the testimony, and then looking at the intergenerational impact of that today, because there are some that say, you know, that happened how many decades ago? Let's move forward. So to be honest with you, I don't really find that it's that politicized. It's more about individual experience.
Okay, I don't know if the cameras caught this, so I'm gonna go here. You just grabbed something and you just patted his back. What just happened?
I get grounded. I have some symbols here. A symbol of my great-great-great-grandfather. His name was Nijute. And I go to my grandparents and my great-great-grandparents and for strength and a reassurance that I know what I'm doing is right.
Is the thing in your hand something you inherited from a grandparent or a great-grandparent?
Actually, it was inherited through a 12-year-old girl.
Show us. What is it? If you don't mind.
It's from the program called Hearts. Do you remember the name of the program? A Heart program that's taught across Canada.
And a 12-year-old girl made you that?
She heard my story, and I'm a Nijute. This is two hearts. Mm-hmm. When the priest and the government got a hold of my grandpa, Nijute, or Nijutins, which means small Nijute, they gave him an English name. Instead of keeping Nijute, they called them, Nijutins, they called them Two Heart. So that side of the family became Two Hearts. My mom became a Two Heart, and which means basically a double heart in our language, double heart, or maybe a twin. So I carry something that signifies who my great-grandfather was. And I feel some strength when I think about my great-grandfather. I feel very fortunate. I knew somebody that was born in 1865 and 1873. And I remember as a little guy remembering the conversations. And I get strength from knowing who they were. They were not quite at the stage of being ashamed of who they were, or the Indianness of them was not completely knocked out of them like it was with us as little boys in school. So I get very much strength on this. And this one here was given to me by an elder. Doesn't mean much. It's inanimate. It's a rock. It's a stone. But he said, anything you put into that stone comes back to you and only you. So there's certain messages in this stone that gives me the strength to be able to talk about. It's hard to talk about residential schools but it's my purpose. But I can't do it alone. So I have, along with my partners here, my wife, this really gives me strength. It really does.
And you saw him grab that, and you knew that that meant he needs some extra strength right now. So you gave him a pat on the back.
So we this morning we were at a school at the Toronto District School Board, and Theodore was speaking to students. And typically, when he speaks, his lovely wife Morgan sits beside him, but she's not here, and so I can't take that place. But I could see a dear friend needing something, so I did my best.
Wait. What's the biggest change in what you've noticed over the last couple of decades, the way things have worked?
You mean within the working of the
Yeah,
kitchen itself? Everything has changed, right? Different people are in the kitchen. I think that over the last years we've seen far more women at the helm, and it's a really interesting decision that women have to make, because we have to kind of decide to be like that. Right? It's where it perhaps may have come more naturally to men as leaders in kitchens. Women have to figure out how to lead a kitchen and whether or not we want to adopt this really angry persona so as to get the respect and compliance of the team, or if we want to try another approach.
And there is a more collegial way to run things.
Yes, there is. But it's not easy. It's not easy.
What's the biggest shift in food culture that you have seen in the time you've been doing what you've been doing?
In the same question, in leadership in kitchens, or
I would
in general
go
on the
more
scene?
broadly, yeah, on the scene.
Yeah, I think there's been a sort of a collective consciousness about food that's evolved, say, in the last 3 decades that I've witnessed. I've sort of been watching for 4, but it really started to accelerate for me sort of mid-'80s, '90s, into the 2000s. In the sense that people cared more about food. They're much more interested in dining out, having an experience that was outside the home. This was really good for us because it really raised the bar in terms of the quality of food being served in restaurants and the level of service being provided in restaurants. We also saw much more representation. Us being a multicultural city, it wasn't really until the last 20 years where you actually were aware of that multiculturalism in restaurants, because there weren't all that many people doing things from their culture available to the population in general. A lot of it happened behind closed doors in people's homes.
We're at a time of year when people have just made their New Year's resolutions, and they are thinking about whether they still want to keep them.
Yes.
So
right.
let's put a few on the table here. In terms of food, what do you think people should be resolving to do in this new year?
I would love it if we could put a bit more of a positive spin on the resolution, particularly the ones around food.
Meaning what?
Because the way it exists right now is that there's sort of a message that you are bad and that you have some bad habits, that you had some indiscretions recently over the holidays, right? And that you have some bad habits that you need to grit your teeth and soldier through to change to be a better version of yourself. And I feel like that's a lot. And it's heavy unnecessarily. I would like to suggest that people could resolve to do things that are much more positive and joyful, like resolve to devote one night a meal to cooking dinner for yourself and turn the screens off while you eat it.
One night a week.
Well, just do that, right?
Make a nice dinner.
Make a good
Take
dinner.
the time.
Yeah.
Don't put the TV on.
Have a conversation with somebody across
At 8
the
o'clock,
table.
it's okay, but not before that.
That's exactly
Yes,
it.
okay. Just be clear. We don't mind them turning on the TV at 8 o'clock
Right.
on TVO.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's sort of take the guilt out of it and make it a more positive thing.
Yeah, because you can make choices and food choices that will have beautifully positive impacts on your life. And it doesn't have to be about gritting your teeth and like, I'm not going to eat any of this. Think about the other context around which we eat. It's not just what you're putting in your mouth, but how that food got there and how you prepared it.
Fascinating. Okay, Jamie, what would you add to that list?
What would I add to that list? Well, I'm a cook, and of course I love cooking and I love what happens around the table, and I despair how little that actually happens in the home, especially as time goes on and children become they move off in their own directions, and often parents become a la carte cooks for their kids, and you know, this kid's having this kid's having that. It's a different story.
It's
and
amazing
like,
parents do that, isn't it? That they indulge in that.
It really is.
Yeah.
What happened to one meal for everybody and we're all going to eat it
This
together?
is what's for dinner, yeah.
And I wasn't allowed to leave the table until I choked down those
No,
fish,
me
those fish
neither.
sticks.
Yeah, me neither.
And then hold my nose while I was drinking that powdered milk. No, but along the same lines, actually, is what Josh was saying. I think we've captured a bit of a zeitgeist here. Us as workers in the local food movement would love it, and I'd love it to see people pick up raw ingredients. Let's not purchase processed food. Let's pick up raw ingredients.
Go to farmer's market.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Even,
go to
even in
farmer's
January,
market.
there are lots of beautiful things there, right?
Yeah.
Don't think that just because it's the winter, there's not enough there.
Yeah, and kind of like shift thinking about how you spend your time. So, you know, spending a couple of hours preparing dinner, is that such a bad thing? I don't think so.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety. They're on our website, tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.